Today's daf is daf Tesvav, but we still have to finish up where we left off here on daf Yudalin Amid Beis with regard to the shita of Rabbi Nassan and also Rabbi Yaakov of Yachzeru Liyorshe Mishalech. And what does this mean? The case was that a person appointed a shliach and he said, Holech mana leploni, take this money to so-and-so. And v'holach, the shliach went, and biksho v'lo matzo. And of course, unfortunately, the makabel had died. And here we have machlokes tree the Tanakama and Rab Nosson Rab Yaakov. The Tanakama says that the mos go back to the mishalech, meaning the transaction, the gift was never completed. And Rab Nosson Rab Yaakov said, no, Yachzeru liyorshe mishalech. The Yorshim will inherit this money. And what does that mean? So the Gemara suggests that Rab Shimon Hanasi, Maisa Osalash Midin, he tells us a Maisa Shahaya. And based on this Maisa Shahaya, where the Mishalech died, then the Chachamim said, Yachzu Amos Liyorshe Mishalech, because Mishalech himself died. But in the case where the Makabel died, then Yachzu Amos L'Mishalech. So the Gemara rejects this. The Gemara says, lo. So this is where we want to pick it up, exactly where we left off yesterday, just a few lines before the end of Daf Yudalin Amid Beis. The Gemara says, Bebari, if the Mishalech was healthy, was not a Shchiv Meirah, Kuliyama lo pligi, everybody agrees that Holech lav kischi, and therefore the mos go back to the Mishalech. That's for sure. But v'hachamay askinon b'shchiv meirah. The Brisa is addressing the case of a shchiv meirah. B'plugta d'Rabbi Loza Rabbanan kamifligi. And now the Gemara presents a machlokas between Rabbi Loza and Rabbanan with regard to the status of shchiv meirah. We're very used to assuming the principle of divrei shchiv meirah kiksuvim u'kimesurim dami, but that happens to be the shita of the Chachamim, not the shita of Rabbi Loza. The Snan. We have a Mishnah at the end of Baba Basra, Hamachalik nechosav al piv, a man divvies up his property to his children, and he designates a different sum for each one of his children, which is not the normal way that someone bequeaths money in which all his children get an equal share. Rabbi Loza Omer, echad bar v'echad mesukan. It doesn't matter whether the person who divvies up his money is healthy or he's a shchiv meirah. In all cases, the action of the av is totally invalid. Why? Because nechasim sheish lamachrayis niknim bekesef ushtar chazaka. The only way the yoresh could have acquired ownership is through kesef shtar chazaka in the case of karka. And in the case of metaltal, which is called Nechasim Shein Le'em Achrayis, Ein Niknin El B'Mashicha. So Rabbi Lazar rejects the principle of Divrei Shchimah Kiksuvim. Ksuvim domain, it all depends upon whether the kinyan was effectuated. But Chacham Omrim Elu Velu Nechasim Niknim Be'amira. Whether or not the Chole was bequeathing his karka or his metaltalin, everything is chal ba'amira because divrei shchiv meirah kiksuvim kimsurim. Amru lo, the Chacham said to Rabbi Lazar, Maisa be'iman shel b'nei Rochel, his name was Rochel, and shahoisa chola. So the grandmother took ill, and while she was ill, v'amra, she commanded that tinasein, and here we're starting daf tesvav, kibinasi, some sort of a beautiful ornamental pin that they used to put into a garment, libiti. Vehi b'shnei masar mana. It's very, very valuable. It's worth 12 mana. The Mesa. And Kimu Chacham Istvareh, they gave the Vinasa to this daughter and not to any of the other children that were Yoshim. And the reason for that is because the Kinyan was Chal through the halacha of Divrei Shchimra Kiksuvim Ukimasurim Dam. Omalahem, so Rabbi Elazar said to Chacham, B'nei Rochel Tikbarim Iman. So this family called the B'nei Rochel were very, very evil people. And we don't even mention their name in a Beis HaMedrash. And Rabbi Elazar curses them. And it seems that the reason for this is because they violated the Isur Kilayim. So the Chacham didn't want to mention their name in the Beis Medrash. So they weren't medagdek exactly in, whether the halacha is this way or that way. They just said the following, the mother made it tzivui, and this would knock off the B'nai Rochel, and that's the way the Chachamim wanted it to stand. So that these Rishayim would not inherit the Kbenisa. In any event, getting back online, we have here Machlok Shim Chacham Rabbi Elazar regarding Divrei Shchimera. Is it Kiksum Miksum Dami or not? Tana Kama, the first Tana in our Brisa, that if the Mishaleach is still alive, then the most go back to the Mishaleach, that's Ki Rabbi Elazar, because he doesn't have the principle of Shchimera, Divrei Shchimera, Kiksum Miksum Dami. Therefore, the Makabel was not Zocha in the Mos. And the most, therefore, go back to the Mishalech. Rabbi Nosson, Rabbi Yaakov, they said that even if the Mishalech died, nevertheless, the most go back to the Yarshim of the Mishalech, Nami ki Rabbi Elazar. They also hold like Rabbi Elazar that Divrei Shchimera einam kiksumim psurim dami. Afal gav de mis, you might say, wait a minute, if the Mishaleach died, then let's apply the other principle of mitzvah l'kaim divrei hames. Lo amrina mitzvah l'kaim divrei hames. So on two counts, the transaction is not valid, and it goes back to the Yorshim of the Mishaleach. On one count, because divrei shchimera lav kiksumim sumidami. On another count is we don't accept the principle of mitzvah l'kaim Divrei Hames. Yesh Omrim. What about the Yesh Omrim in the Brisa? They said that the money is given to the Yarshim of the Makabel. Ki Rabbanon, they hold like the Rabbanon that Divrei Shchimera Kiksum Miksumim Dami. And therefore, immediately when the mana was given over to the Shliach, the transaction was Chal. And therefore, the Yorshim of the Makabel will inherit this mana. Then we have the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Sha'omar Mishum Rabbi Meir, that mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames. He holds ki Rabbi Elazar that on the one hand, divrei shchimera einam kiksum surim dami. However, heicha demis, if the Mishalech who sent this money and expressed his interest in this money being transferred over to so and so the Makabel, then Amrina, we apply a principle of mitzvah l'kayim, it's divrei hames. So even though we hold like Rabbi Elazar, and therefore the transaction was not complete at the time that the Makabel was alive, but nevertheless, even though it wasn't complete, we have a mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames, and therefore the mana is given over to the Yarshim of the Makabel. B'chachamim omrim yachloku. Mesafgalon, they were in doubt whether or not divrei shchimera kiksumim psurim dami, whether or not mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames, and therefore kan amru, they said yachloku. And in Bavel, as we said yesterday, they applied the principle of shuda, which means that the shaliach himself could evaluate and figure out what was the das of the Mishaleach, Adif, and that's even better than Yachloku. Reb Shimon HaNasi, Maisa Asal Ashminan, he adds to the words of Rabbi Nosson and Rabbi Yaakov, the Chachamim Horu Halach LaMaisa Kemos. Now the Gemara has a little bit of a short digression here. Iboilahu, Rabbi Shimon HaNasi, we quoted in this brisa, Rabbi Shimon HaNasi, who was he? Nasi who? Was he really himself the Nasi? Oh, Mishmei the Nasi Kamar. He himself was not the Nasi, he was just quoting the Nasi. Hashma, the Gemara says, the Omer of Yosef, halacha Rabbi Shimon HaNasi. Now, if Rav Yosef, who's an Amora, would have had in mind that Rav Shimon was quoting the Nasi, then he should have been more clear about it. But the fact that he just said Stam, Rabbi Shimon HaNasi, that proves that Rav Shimon himself was the Nasi. So when I ask Madayin Tiboilach, I still have a question. Even on the words of Rav Yosef, we still have room for doubt. Nasi who? Maybe Rav Yosef, as you said, meant to say that Rav Shimon was the Nasi. Odika Amar Mishmei the Nasi, even though Rav Yosef didn't explicate that this was in the name of the Nasi, Rav Yosef wanted to conform with the language of the Brisa, and therefore he uses the term Rabbi Shimon HaNasi. The Gemara leaves this as an unanswered question. Gufa, Amar Rav Yosef, halacha Rabbi Shimon HaNasi, which means that the money goes back to the Yarshim of the Mishaleh. And we don't apply the principle of Divrei Shchimra Kiksuvim because we hold like Rabbi Loz. So the Gemara asks, wait a minute, how could Rav Yosef paskin like Rabbi Shimon HaNasi that the money goes back to the Yarshim of Mishaleh al Kaimel on Divrei Shchimra Kiksuvim Dami? In other words, forget about the issue of Divrei Shchimra. Forget about the issue of Mitzvah L'Kayim Divrei Ames. We have a more fundamental halacha, and that is, as the Gemara establishes at the end of Bava Basra, we paskin like the Chachamim that Divrei Shchimra Kiksuvim Dami. So therefore, the money shouldn't go back to the Yarshim Shaleh, but rather to the Yarshim and the Makabel. And the Gemara answers, Rav Yosef Mukile Bibari. He assumes that the Brisa is referring about a case not of a Shchimera, but where the Mishalech was a Bari. And certainly Divrei Bari, Einam Kiksuvim B'surim Dami, that we know for sure. And therefore, the money goes back to the Yarshim Mishalech. So where is the Kasha for Yarshim Mishalech Ka'amar? Reb Shimon said that the money should be given to the Yarshim and the Mishalech. Why the emphasis on the Yarshim? As if to say that the Kinyan was Chal, and in the death of the Makabel, we pass it on through the mechanism of Yarshim, of Yerusha to the Yarshim. Forget about that. So even if he was a Bari and he was Mitzaveh, then the most have to be transferred over to the Makabel Matana, or the Yarshim and the Makabel Matana, because of the din of Mitzvah L'Kayim Divrei Ames. So how could Rav Yosef paskin like Rav Shimon HaNasi that the most are given to the Yarshim Mishalech? And the Gemara answers, to me, you have to change the language of Rav Shimon. And it should say, Yachzeru l'Mishalech. And what does that mean? The Mishalech is still alive. And therefore, if we're talking about a Bari, then there's no Divrei Shchimira. And not only that, there's no Mitzvah L'Kayim Divrei Ames because he's still alive. Adjon Alecha Mevi Kam. So now we're up to Hamevi Basra, the second parak, and the Mishnah says the following. Hamevi get mimedinas hayam, and here we have the Takonos Chachamim of Fanei Nechtam, but unfortunately the Shliach did not do it exactly the way the Chachamim had established that he should do it. The Omar, although he said B'fanei Nechtav, Avolo, but he did not say B'fanei Nechtam. And if you recall, we came to the conclusion back on Daf Dalit, I think it was, that even Rabbah, who's worried about Lishma, agrees that we have to be Mekayim the Chasimas on the get, like Rabbah. And therefore, Kuliyamalo plea that we need a kiyum on the Chasimas of the get. But we don't have such a thing. Why? Because the Shliach did not say B'fanei Nechtam. Now we have another scenario. The Shliach said B'fanei Nechtam, And that would l'chora suffice according to Rava. And now we have a problem according to Rava because we don't know if the get was written in Chutzarts Lishma. So here again, the get is going to be possible. Now we have a third scenario. Befanai nichtav. We'll see later on. The Gemara is going to interpret this Mishnah based on lo zu afzu. That each additional case adds a chiddush to the previous case. Befanai nichtav kula. I saw, says the shliach, the entire get from beginning to top to bottom written. But I only saw half of the chasima. What that means is that two eidim are signed on the get. The shliach admits that one of the two eidim signed shelo b'fanav. The other eid signed b'fanav. So we don't have a full edus on the part of the shliach on b'fanai nechtam. He only saw the chasim of one of the two witnesses. Next case. B'fanai nichtav chetzia. I only testify on half the get. The Gemara is going to waver back and forth. Which half of the get did he not see in the writing of the get? B'fanai nechtam kula, although I saw the entire chasima of both the eid and posel. In all the cases above, it's posel. Now, according to Rabbah, you can't be machshir this get. You got to throw it into the trash because it doesn't have lishma in it. According to Rav, on the other hand, the get itself could be kosher if two eidim would come and testify on the chasimos, because Rav is only concerned with the taina, the era of Mizuya. Now the Mishnah goes on to a case where a get was carried from Medina Sayyam by two different shluchim. Echad omer b'fanei nechtav, echad omer b'fanei nechtav. So you might say, let's integrate the two witnesses together, and we have a testimony both on ksiva and on chasima posel. Now, according to Rabbah, if only one of them was a shliach, then the get would be posel because he's not testifying on both the ksiva and the chasima. That makes sense. Because one aid, meaning one shliach, testified on the ksiva, the other on the chasima. But now we have two shluchim. And the shliach says b'farei nechtam, but he didn't say b'farei nechtam, and vice versa. So the Mishnah is afraid that maybe in shar shtaros they'll be mekayim with one aid, because l'maisa there's only one aid on the chasimos. Now, according to Rava, if you have two shluchim on the get, then the get logically should be kosher, because according to Rava, we need two witnesses to be mekayim the chasima. We have two witnesses to mekayim the chasima. But the answer is that this Mishnah that we're learning now is addressing a scenario in which only one of them was a shliach. And the get is possible because that shliach has to be able to testify b'fanei nechtam and b'fanei nechtam. Okay, now we have a case where three people carry the get from Medina Sayyam. Shnayim omrim b'fanenu nechtam. Echad, we have the third shliach, and he's testifying b'fanei nechtam. Possible? Now, this is really difficult. Why is this possible? We have no issue, neither with regard to Lishma, nor with regard to Kiyum Shtar. We have two Eidim testifying on the Ksiva Lishma, and we have the Shliach who's testifying on the Chasima. And the Gemara is going to offer three different shitos as to how to explain this mission. Rabbi Yehuda Machshir. So let's go according to Rabbah. Rabbah said that in later generations, even though they became Bekiyim and Lishma in Medina Sayyam, nevertheless, we still maintain the original requirement, the Takonis Chacham Farei Nechtam, and that's based on the logic of Shema Yachzar Adavar L'Kulkula. So the Tanakama here in our mission that apostles this get, he is maintaining Shema Yachzar Adavar L'Kulkula. And therefore, the Takonim Farei Nechtam still is active, it's still in place. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, holds no. This is a davar shelo shchiach, the possibility that maybe they wouldn't have written in the Bezdin over there in Chutz La'aretz Lishma, that's not shchiach. And if it's not shchiach, then lo gazru be'Rabbanan, and we're not going to introduce the gzeir of Shema Yachzar Adavar L'Kulkula. So if only one of them was the shliach, then everybody would agree that this get is possible, because he's required to testify Farei Nechtam on both. The machlok in Tanakam Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah is when two of them were shlichim, and the Tanakam apostles the get even after they became experts in Chutz La'aretz and Lishma, and we need that both the shluchim should testify both on the ksiva and the chasima because of Shema Yachzar Adavar L'Kulkula. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, holds that if you have two shlichim, this has nothing to do with Chabad, but anyway, there are two shlichim, then you don't need it all b'fanei nechtam, because we have two people in front of us that could be Mekayim the get. If the Baal comes and says, well, it's Mizuya. And we're not going to be choshesh that the get was written Shelo Lishma, because now they're experts in Lishma. So therefore, in Shnei Shlichim, we are not choshesh sheyachzar adavar l'kulkula. That's all according to Rav. According to Rav, on the other hand, if there were two shluchim, then everybody would agree that the get is kosher, because two people that bring a get, they don't have to say b'fanei nechtam, according to Rav. But rather, Mishnah is talking about a case in which the one person who's made on the chasima is the shliach. And Tanakama says the get is possible because he's not capable of testifying both Farei Nechtam and B'farei Nechtam. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the get is kosher because we have two Eidim testifying on the ksiva, even if they're not shluchim. And we have a heker adavar that this is a special din and get. We're not going to come to think that, well, somebody will be machshir shtar shtaros with a kiyum of Eidech. And finally, the Mishnah concludes by saying that if these three people who come from Medina Sayyam with a get, echad omer farei nechtam, ushnayim omer farneinu nechtam, kosher. So we have the shliach testifying on ksiva, and that we accept him kishnayim, and we have another two testifying on the chasima, which is exactly the way we would do it in kiyum shtaros. So we don't have the previous chashash that somebody make a mistake about kiyum shtaros b'echad. And therefore, the get is kosher. Again, because you have two Eidim testifying on both of the chasimos to be mekayim. The Gemara says, su lamali. What is this extra din in the Mishnah that if the shliach makes a shinu, he deviates, or he leaves out something for the Takonis Chachamim, then the get is possible? We already have that. We have the Mishnah that says, "Maybe get Medina Sayyam tzarich shiyom b'farei nechtam," and it's move on mi'ela. We understand that if it's mishadev the Takonis Chacham, the get is possible. So our answer is, if the Tana would have relied on that original Mishnah at the beginning of the Masechet, I would have thought tzarich. The word tzarich means l'chatchila. But b'di'evet, he didn't say b'farei nechtam v'farei. The get would be kosher. Kamash Malon, our Mishnah is telling us no. If he's meshana from the requirement of the Chacham as they were masakin it, the get is possible. Okay, now the Mishnah says that if the shliach says b'farei nechtam chetzio, b'farei nechtam kulo, possible. So Gemara asks, "Hi chetzio." which is the half of the get that the shliach says that he saw the ksiva. The top half of the get, which is called the toref, that's the ikar get. It has the shema ish, the mokum ksivas I get the zman and the nesina. The zman nesina, and also the key of keys. All this is in the top half of the get, which is the toref, and the shliach saw the writing of the Torah. And therefore, I don't understand how the get could possibly be possible. All we need is shita achas. Now here you have machlokas Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi says that shita achas means the Torah itself, which, as we said before, includes the shema ish, shema isha, the mokum, the zman, and that's more than one top line. Tosfos disagrees, and he holds that dai b'shita achas. In other words, it's enough that the shliach witnessed that the hascholas aksiva was lishma. We can assume min hastam that the siyam aksiva was lishma. Ella, so now we're in trouble. We're trying to figure out why chetzio in ksiva is possible. Which is called the Tofes. The Tofes has sort of like a bit of a summary, a repeat, a tamtzit of the Ikar I get, which is the Torah, and it says there, Patris Yisi, Lichi, and Plonis, Bas Plonis. So the Shliach is testifying now that that part of the get was written in his presence, but he didn't see the Ikar I get. And therefore, we don't have Eidus on Lishma, and the get is possible. Now the Mishnah goes on, and the Shliach said, B'fanai nechtav kulo, U'b'fanai nechtam chetzio. What does that mean? And the get is possible. And here's where we have a three-way machlokas. Omer Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says that when he says, B'fanai nechtam chetzio, what it means is that only one aid signed in my presence. So there's one signature in which the shliach says, I did not witness the signature, therefore I cannot testify. But you have two aidim from the street who recognize that second chasima and then mekayim that chasima. Nevertheless, the get is possible. Pilei Ploim. This is an unbelievable halacha of Chizda. You've got the shliach has an aid who's Nema Kishnayim testifying on the ksiva. You've got the shliach as an aid who's testifying on one of the two chasimos. You have two aidim in Ashuk who are testifying on the other chasima, which the shliach did not witness. My timer. What's the logic of Rav Chizda? Why should the Mishnah apostle such a get? And the Gemara answers, Okulo b'kiyum laget, okulo k'takonas chacham. You have two options here. Either you have two chasimos and this kiyum get. In other words, we go through the regular classic takonas chacham of kiyum get. So you got two eidim testifying on the two chasimos. Or we have the takonas chachamim of a shliach, that a shliach brings medin sayam and he testifies on both the ksiva and the chasima. But here, it's not this and it's not that. Because one of the two chasimos had a kiyum through the shliach when he said b'fanei nechtam chetzio, and the other chasima had two edim, which is kiyum shtaros. But we can't combine the two to get as possible. Rav Chizda is very, very rigid. Maskif la Rav. Rav says, I don't understand what you're talking about. If the shliach had said not only b'fanei nechtam, but also b'fanei nechtam, there's only one aid. Is kosher hashadika trey. You have two witnesses from the shuk who could testify as to the authenticity of the second chasima, and you're going to tell me it's possible? You're telling me that two Eidim are worse than a Shliach? The Ramana made a takana to upgrade the status of the Shliach as if he were two Eidim, but now we have two Eidim on the Chasimos. And therefore, for sure, says Rava, if two Eidim were made on the Chasimos Yad Hasheni, the second signature, the get would be kosher against Rav Chisda. So now Rava has to reinterpret the Chiddush of this Mishnah. El Omar Rava Afilu.